Hi everyone, Rachel here. Welcome to episode number 25 of the Walk the Talk podcast. So in this episode, we are talking about PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and I have the pleasure of talking to Clare Goodwin, the PCOS nutritionist, about this topic. We're covering all aspects of the condition, everything from how to identify the root cause of your PCOS to how to approach weight loss when you have PCOS and everything in between. So sit back, relax and enjoy this really informative episode with Clare. I'll be back at the end to let you know how you can find out more about Clare and where to find her. Until then, enjoy. Okay, so on today's episode, we are talking to Clare, the PCOS nutritionist. Hi, Clare, how are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Really good. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast and having a chat with me about PCOS. It's something that I've wanted to speak to someone about for quite some time, and I know there are a lot of people listening to this that will be able to take away some great knowledge from you today.
Yeah, it's great to be on here. Thank you for having me. It's good to spread the word about how we can actually, reverse PCOS really, rather than just have to manage our symptoms like everyone keeps telling us we do.
Yeah, I'm excited to get in about it. But before we do, let's have a chat about you. Can you tell me a little bit about your background? You had PCOS, is that right? And then you decided that you wanted to help other people after you helped yourself?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So So it was really probably what got me into studying nutrition and exercise science at university was that I couldn't really figure out my own weight issue. And this was when I was competing for New Zealand and running and then later triathlon when I was at school and university. And in those sports that are very weight dependent, it was quite a problem that my weight kind of kept piling on and I just couldn't figure it out. I was like, I'm doing all the right things that I'm learning at university. I'm managing my calorie equation, but it still doesn't seem to be working for me. And so I guess that's why I kind of got into studying it in the first place. And then latterly when I got diagnosed with PCOS, it kind of made sense. But yes, it was really from my own struggle. And then it took me many, many years to figure out what was actually going wrong and then how to treat it and reverse my symptoms. And then once I'd done that, I was like, right, well, this is my calling. I have to go and help other women do the same.
Mm-hmm. And PCOS, for anyone that's listening that doesn't actually know what it is or has perhaps been diagnosed but still isn't entirely sure what the condition entails, could you tell us a little bit about it and sort of what people that have this condition are suffering from or suffering with? What are the typical symptoms and how does it affect your life?
Yeah, so PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome, which the name is quite misrepresentative of what it actually is. So when you first get diagnosed, you think, oh gosh, I've got these cysts on my ovaries that are causing me to gain weight, and the symptoms are, weight gain can be one of them. Also missing periods, like I didn't have a period for 2 years, which they always said was just because I was training too hard, but that definitely wasn't the case. And then also can be facial hair growth or other body hair growth, can be acne, which I suffered from, and hair loss is another big one, especially in sort of the male areas, the male receding kind of hairline areas and on the kind of the crown of the head. And so when you think, okay, polycystic ovarian syndrome, you think, okay, I've got these cysts on my ovaries that are causing this, but that's not the case at all. The name is probably going to go through a rechange in the next few years to be something more accurate, like excess androgen syndrome or something like that. Because really what it is that it's an excess of testosterone in the body in females, or there's other kind of testosterone-like ones that are called DHEAS and androstenedione. And so what they do is that they cause an imbalance in our menstrual function, and so that then disrupts ovulation, meaning that we don't get a period, or maybe we have quite long cycles. And then when we're not ovulating, so that disrupts ovulation, which that's why you don't get a period or you get very long periods.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when you're not ovulating, that's what causes those little eggs that are supposed to be released. They kind of become stuck on the ovary, and that's what appears as cysts. So it's not the cyst causing anything, they're merely a symptom, and they shouldn't actually be called cysts, they should be called follicles, because that's actually what they are. So it's not like you're then going to develop cancer, they're not tumorous or anything like that. They're merely, they almost have nothing to do with the condition. It's more about that high androgens that's really causing all the symptoms.
Mm-hmm. That is really confusing then, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. Wow, I have learned something there. So it's obviously that the symptoms of this condition are, I would say I have IBS, and I know that the symptoms that I have are quite life-limiting in a way and can get you down in many different ways. And I actually have a couple of friends who have PCOS that also suffer from low mood and just generally feeling like they've been abandoned by their doctor a little bit, left to sort of, okay, you've got this condition. There's not really very much that we can do about it. You need to sort of manage the symptoms. Is that the case? Or, I mean, do you need to just say, okay, I've got this now. Now I just need to manage the symptoms, because that's quite a defeatist way to go about it.
Yeah, it really is, and it can leave you feeling quite victimized, like, oh, I'm the victim of these cysts on my ovaries or my genetics or something, and I can't exactly go in and pull the cysts out that are causing this. But if you understand that that's actually not the case, and it's that the hormone imbalance, and if you understand that there's always a reason for the hormone imbalance, or like a root cause, then it's much more empowering. Then you're like, okay, I can deal with this now. There's something that I can work with. Mm-hmm. So, but the reason that your doctor can't help, and I actually have a lot of doctors who go through my program, who come to me because they're like, we don't learn any of this at medical school. We don't have tools in our kit bag to be able to help our patients or even help ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's because with something like PCOS, there's no drug that we can give you to fix it. Yes, we can take like hormonal birth control to give ourselves a fake period, but we're not treating the actual issue, which is that the imbalance of testosterone, and I'll talk a minute about what can cause that. But so no surgery or no drugs can help, and that's really what they learn at medical school, is that's the treatment. And so that's why I got into studying functional medicine after I finished my training in nutrition and exercise science, because functional medicine is all about treating the root cause of chronic illness, mm-hmm. like PCOS, rather than treating the symptoms. Like, okay, here for acne we'll give you an antibiotic, for like your missing period we'll give you the birth control pill, for other symptoms we might give you something like spirulactone. But none of it actually fixes the root cause, which is what's actually driving that hormone imbalance. Yeah. And but actually, if we can figure out what that is, and it's different for lots of women with PCOS, there's not just one kind of root cause. Mm-hmm. We can figure out what your root cause is and treat that. Then we can bring those symptoms down. Then we can actually get a resolution for you and actually reverse your PCOS entirely in a lot of cases. So say, for example, you reduce it down as much that you would no longer be diagnosed with PCOS.
Wow.
So, yeah, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, that is indeed. I'm sure it would improve the lives of a lot of people as well if they knew about it.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned that you look at the root cause of PCOS and treat the root cause rather than, just put a Band-Aid over the symptoms. What types of root causes can there be of PCOS, and how would you know which one you have?
Yeah, so I think the main thing to realise with PCOS is that there is always a genetic component. So mm-hmm. yes, we are genetically predisposed, and this is kind of a survival mechanism, because our bodies in PCOS, we are really the survival of the fittest in terms of the way that our environment was thousands of years ago. So our bodies are very good at switching off ovulation when our environment's not right. And storing fat. So it's actually a survival mechanism. But it's just that in our modern environment, it's not very helpful, because that same thing, our body reacts in the same way, even though actually we're not in danger. Mm-hmm. So while there's that genetic component, there's always an environmental trigger that turns the genes on. And this is called epigenetics. Mm-hmm. And so if we can figure out what that environmental thing is, then we can actually switch those genes off, and therefore you stop getting the symptoms. Mm-hmm. So the main one in PCOS is insulin resistance or pre-type 2 diabetes.
Right.
And this is because the high levels of insulin in the body actually stimulate the ovaries to overproduce testosterone. And that's really what causes, that's really what PCOS is. So that's for 80%, up to 80% of women with PCOS. And then there's other areas, so stress is probably the other biggest one that I see, high stress hormones. And that can go hand in hand with insulin resistance. So you don't just have to fit into one kind of type. You can have like lots of different confounding factors happening with you. I certainly did. I had both insulin resistance or pre-type 2 diabetes, even though I was an international athlete. And then I also had very high stress hormones, which were, making things worse. And for a lot of people, they also have very high inflammation, which goes hand in hand with insulin resistance, and or a thyroid condition can be the other one, which can cause this as well. So what we do, what my role is to then do some blood work to figure out what's causing yours. So we do some testing for insulin resistance. We do the main test for that. We test your DHEAS, which is your adrenal androgen. So that tests for kind of the stress PCOS. And we also test for high levels of inflammation, and also do a full thyroid panel as well to see if that could be part of the cause for you. So mostly using like empirical data that we get from blood tests. So we're not guessing, because that's what I always hated, was just kind of like, trying different diets and different supplements, hoping that kind of one will stick and work. But if we can actually see from the blood work and the data what's actually going on, we can make much better decisions.
Okay. So I found it quite interesting that you said that it's, you are genetically predispositioned, and it's a case of, you can turn the gene off. But can you, will you always have this until you get diagnosed, or is it something that you can, develop later in life? Is it something that, can the gene be switched on by something later in life, or is it something that you kind of grew up with?
Absolutely. So it can be that you're always going to have that genetic predisposition, but if you've got, so say for example for me at the moment, I don't have the symptoms of PCOS because I have brought down my testosterone, I've reversed my insulin resistance, and so it's no longer there. But if I went back to living the way that I was when I was an athlete, so, living off sugary gels and sports drinks, which were stimulating my insulin resistance, if I was, training as hard as I was, up to 20 hours a week, also doing, study in my thesis, and had high stress hormones, then I would turn that back on. So it's a matter of thinking about that you're always going to have this, but if you don't have those environmental factors, then it might not have been turned on for you until much later in life. So you might find that it's after having children. We generally find, though, that it hits a lot of women. It can hit around puberty, and also it can hit around kind of the 20s as well. But a lot will not be diagnosed because they'll be missed, and so they won't get diagnosed until much later. But it definitely can hit later in life.
And for anyone that's listening that might want to start to, maybe they've just got a glimmer of hope there from what you've been speaking about so far, and they perhaps want to find out what their root cause is. If they can do that, what would be the next step? Sort of, does it depend on what the root cause is? Is there, or is there anything that people can actually start to do right away that will help to manage the symptoms better? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is, if you can start to figure out what that root cause is, then that's a huge bonus, because I think it just gives you some clarity. Because I think for me, the hardest bit was just not knowing what was going on. When I knew, and then I also, with my background, I could kind of figure out what the treatment was for that. Then it meant that there was no longer, I wasn't just spending hours a day researching, asking other women in Facebook groups and things what supplements they'd taken that had helped, and just trying guess and hope for the best. It was that I actually had a plan. And that was really helpful. And so that's what I do as my job, is I do that for women, and I've done that for a long time, one-on-one. And then over the last 6 months, I've actually taken what I do and put that into a program, so it's much more affordable for women to go through that. And they're also doing it with other women as well. So it's a 16-week program they call the PCOS protocol, and in the first week we go through. I've created a type identifier, so you fill in either your blood tests or your symptoms, and then it tells you kind of what the most likely root cause is. So it's like, okay, your blood work is showing that yes, you do have some early stage insulin resistance, so this is the type. And then over the next 15 weeks, we then change your diet and your and give you the right kind of exercise for your type, and also the right supplements that are going to help, because there's supplements are kind of like medicine in a way that we take them for a specific reason. So for example, if it's herbs, you wouldn't go to the doctor and just be given a statin for anything. You're giving that for like a heart condition. So if you went in there with a headache, you wouldn't be given a statin, you'd be given paracetamol. Similarly, we wouldn't just give everyone with PCOS the same supplement. It would be, okay, if you've got insulin resistance, then for example, berberine has been shown to be incredibly effective at helping to reverse insulin resistance. So, there's been a lot of studies that behind a lot of these supplements, so they can be really, really effective. Similarly, if you've got a vitamin D deficiency, then you're going to need vitamin D. So that's why it's really important to actually not just guess and hope, but actually work with what your kind of root cause or type is. So that would be the first thing that I would say. But if you then want to kind of make a start now without going through that, then I think probably given that 80% of women with PCOS have insulin resistance, and especially if weight gain is one of your symptoms, then the best thing you can do dietary-wise is really to start to really cut out sugar from your diet, because that's only going to be stimulating more insulin to be released. And by sugar, I don't just mean your white table sugar or adding sugar to coffee. I also mean all of like the quote-unquote natural sugars, like your dates and agave nectar and maple syrup and things like that. All of the, and otherwise, and other people that don't have insulin resistance, they can handle that in small amounts. But just if you have insulin resistance, it's literally what that means is that your body cannot take up that glucose into the cell. It's not getting into there, and instead it's being stored as fat. And so that's probably the number one thing that I could say that everybody could start to do.
That's great advice. While we're on the subject of weight gain with PCOS, I was on your website and I read something that really sort of sparked my interest, and I thought I'd ask you about it. Now, you spoke about this earlier as well, talking about your own struggle with your weight, and you said that there must be something going on here that's not just the basic equation of calories in versus calories out, which I found really, really interesting, because you hear so much of this nowadays. You just need to eat less and exercise more, but there's so much more to our bodies than just that. Would you agree when it comes to PCOS that there is a lot more going on than just calories in versus calories out?
Absolutely. This is one of my favourite topics, and I love it. And it's so funny because you see so many, so many people on the internet who are talking about this. Like I'm thinking of like James Smith and Ben Coomer and stuff, who are very much just like, nah, that's the only thing, calories in, calories out. And I was like, okay, guys, so if that was the case, then how can we give, say for example, if we give cortisone, the steroid, to people, we don't change their weight, we don't change their food at all, we notice that they gain weight. And so cortisone is a steroid form of cortisol, your stress hormone. Right. And so how can that be if there's no change in calories in, calories out, but yet the only thing we've changed is give them cortisone? How can that cause a weight gain? And so the way that I explain it is that yes, the calorie equation it's still relevant, but actually our body can override that with hormones. And this is our body's way of protecting us from famine and starvation and things like that, is that it can regulate our metabolic rate and it can down-regulate that, so that we're not burning as many calories. And this has been shown to be very much the case in PCOS, is that women have a much lower metabolic rate. And also when with something like insulin resistance, is that So you imagine that, so insulin is our storage hormone. So when we eat, and especially when we eat like carbohydrates, is that they're broken down into glucose in the blood, and then they have to be taken up and stored within the cells and then used as energy. But our cells are always locked, so they always have a lock on them, and it's insulin that's got the key to unlock the cell. But what happens in insulin resistance is it's like the insulin goes up to unlock the door, but the lock doesn't quite, it becomes stuck and sticky, and so the key doesn't quite fit. And so insulin's like sitting there like wriggling around trying to get the lock open, but it doesn't, nothing works. And so our body will start to get a bit panicky. It'll then send more insulin there, hoping that someone's got the key. And in the meantime, it's like, okay, we can't have high blood glucose. So instead, body, you've just got to go and store this somewhere. And so it's then stored as fat or stored in the liver, which leads to non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome as well. So the result of that is that even though you're eating normal amounts, it's that your body can't actually utilize that for energy because it can't get it into the cell. So it's storing it as weight and it was fat. And so you have this double whammy effect where you have really high, like no energy, you feel absolutely exhausted because your cells are literally starving, they're crying out for food. But then you've got enough food, but it's just because it's being stored as fat. And so you've got this really horrible paradox of no energy, but then massive weight gain.
That's really interesting because it's something that, I see on social media like every other day. And, for the most part, like you say, it does play a part, but there's so much more to the human body than simply what you eat and how much you exercise or what you take in vs what you burn off.
And I think especially for females, like we have, not the males' hormones aren't affected the same way that females' hormones are, because if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, this was the way that this is a survival mechanism. So we were the ones that controlled that was our only kind of form of contraception, is our body's ability to switch on and off ovulation very quickly by taking in cues from the environment. And so if our body is not quite set up well for our new modern day environment, it's still detecting cues from our thinking that we're in danger from famine or like tribal warfare or bears and tigers and stuff, which are not the case anymore. So it's whereas a male body doesn't do that. It just pumps out testosterone 24/7. They don't have that contraceptive mechanism. So and so that's why our bodies turn off that ovulation when the environment's not right. So this is why you'll see women losing their period when they're not eating enough calories or they're not eating enough carbohydrates is also another big one. This is not necessarily talking about PCOS, but women that don't have PCOS. And so this is why we are so much more susceptible to things like thyroid conditions. 70% of thyroid conditions are in women, and that that can cause a lot of weight gain in itself. So this is why I think that especially often you'll see this men talking about calorie equation being the only way is because they don't understand that the female body and the male body are not the same. We're very, very different. We're not just small men.
No, it's quite a big claim to make as well, and it's they're very stubborn about it. Like, you're not losing weight, well, you're eating too much. Then, like the bottom line is you are eating too much. Like, there's so much more going on than that. And
while I would agree that we can't just eat, say, 3,000 calories and expect to lose weight. We do have to stick to a calorie equation. But what I don't agree with is then just reducing that down more and more. So say, for example, if your gold standard for weight loss for a female was about 1,600 calories, say, let's say if, depending on how active they are, but a 500 calorie deficit. So if you're not losing weight at 1,600 calories, then what I really disagree with is reducing that down even further, because if it's why flog a dead horse. If that's not working, then find the other reason why that's not working. And generally in PCOS, it's because you're not fixing that insulin resistance or the stress hormone imbalance or something like that. So that's why I always say fix that root cause first, and then you can kind of manipulate the calorie equation and see, and then if it works then.
And for those that are listening that are maybe just eyes are lighting up now with the glimmer of hope that they've been looking for a long, long time, what is the sort of timescale of when you start to address this issue to the point where you could, go and have another blood test and it would be sort of, okay, you don't have PCOS anymore? Is everyone totally different, or is there like a time scale that people should be aiming for?
I think everyone's completely different, and it really depends on what your starting point is. So how insulin resistant you are, for example. Like if you've got type 2 diabetes, so insulin resistance is like a spectrum or a scale. It can start off being very, very mild, and then if you think about it, like in the lock and key analogy, that lock gets more and more clogged up, and then it becomes completely jammed, so you can't even get the key in there anymore, and then the whole door jamb becomes jammed up, and then eventually your pancreas stops producing insulin, and that's like when you actually need to inject insulin. So that's like the spectrum. So it depends on where you start there versus how long it's going to take to reduce that down. But for a lot of women, like I've seen, for example, I had a woman the other day in my group, the PCOS protocol, and even just after, I think it was about after 6 weeks of doing what we were doing, her testosterone dropped by 2/3.
Wow.
So it was a pretty incredible change. And similarly, I've been working with a woman for 6 months, and she's completely reversed any insulin resistance. Her testosterone is back down to below normal, or sort of like in the low end of normal range, meaning that, that she hasn't got high testosterone. And she's done that within 6 months. So it really depends on where you're starting from. But I think the main thing is it's not necessarily even seeing the blood test, but just your symptoms resolve.
Yeah.
And this is, so I definitely see probably the first thing that improves is period regulation. So that we can generally, even with people that haven't had a cycle for like 2-3 years, can generally see that we can get them back ovulating and getting their period back within, say, 3 months. It's amazing how quick that can happen, actually, considering that, if you think about it, the body always wants to ovulate. So it's trying. It's just that if we can figure out what's stopping it, then that can actually be pretty quick to resolve.
Oh, that's fascinating. So, it's exciting for me because I don't have PCOS, but I do have another syndrome that I was told that I had to live with. Latterly found out that I didn't have to live with it, and the subsidence of symptoms is like probably one of the best things ever. Like, just makes you feel like you can live your life again. So for anyone that's listening that feels like they're about to give up trying, I think maybe we should tell them where they can find you, and what help you can offer them, and how they can go about sort of getting in touch with you if that's something that they wanted to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you're so right. It's that, especially I think the hardest thing is people that are trying to conceive. I think that's one of the hardest times is when they're just feeling like there's nothing I can do. And I just want to let you know that that's not the case at all. If we can figure out why you're not ovulating, then we can get you back ovulating within a matter of months. And so we've seen that unless there's something else causing that infertility, there should be no reason why you then can't conceive after you start ovulating. So the best place to find me is at thepcosnutritionist.com. And then from there, you'll be able to read. There's lots of articles on there. So I do a lot of free stuff on there, which you've got. So there's not only the articles which explain a lot more about like the research behind what I'm talking about here, but then for most articles, I also have like a download, which is like some actionable steps that you can take to start fixing this. And then the next best thing really is to join my next round of the PCOS protocol program. So this is a 16-week one where we go through, so I take 100 women at a time and we go through this all together for 16 weeks to help you in terms of accountability. We have live coaching calls where I'm on there with you kind of talking through any issues. And there's also a Facebook group that goes with that as well. So you get to chat about your issues and celebrate success with the other 100 women that are also going through the program at the same time as you.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. Thank you so much, Claire. I will put all the links and things into the show notes. So if anyone's listening and you've missed that, I'll put it all in the show notes so you can just click on the link and go and have a look. But thank you so much for shedding some light on a subject that's kind of avoided being spoken about, and I know there are a lot of people listening that will take away some great advice from you there, Claire. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Rachel. Thank you so much for having me.
So there we have it for another episode of the Walk the Talk podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. If you did enjoy listening to the episode, please don't forget to leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you're listening to this podcast. I'd really appreciate it, and it does really help the podcast to be pushed out to other people so they can enjoy it as well. A big thank you to Claire. I will leave her website details in the show notes if you want to go and find out more about what she does. And about her programme for those of you who have PCOS and want to learn more. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, don't forget there are 24 previous episodes, so I hope you will subscribe, listen to the previous episodes, and as always, get in touch if you need any further help, advice. You can email me. My email address is rachel@walkthetalklife.com. That's spelled RACHAEL. And you can also download lots of free resources from my website. That is www.walkthetalklife.com. On the homepage, you'll find there are lots of free downloads. So go ahead and grab some of those. I will be back very soon with the next episode of the Walk the Talk podcast. Until then, have a great week, whatever you're up to. See you then.